This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
I'd like to call our August 19th Board of Finance meeting to order. As the public can see, there's three of us at the podium. There's three at our large table. Mr. Frida's to my left, Mrs. McCausey to our right, and Ellen's in the back. We've decided to social distance so that we did not have to continually wear the mask and you could hear us clearer. Having said that, first order of business, minutes from our regular meeting of May 20th. Everyone's had a chance to look at it, review it. Any questions or comments? Can I have a motion to accept the minutes as presented?
Make a motion.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a couple of quick questions for you regarding the minutes for our last all-important May 20th meeting. So in the minutes, you claim that the development of the budget did not change. So I just had a couple of questions, again, regarding the development of the budget for the current fiscal year, as well as the chairman's ground rules for that particular meeting. So just because I'm a member of the minority party, I just had a question. During the Republican caucuses that took place between the end of the budget workshop and the formation of the second March 18th version of the budget, how many of the Board of Finance members were actually in attendance and actually provided input towards the
I'm
development
sorry, I
of the
object to
budget?
that question, Mr. Chairman. I don't think that we should be required to talk about things that occurred during our caucus, as we wouldn't expect the Democrats to either.
Well, again, this pertains to a statement that is made in the minutes, so I'm just trying to better understand exactly what went into both the development of the budget as well as the chairman's
Sure.
stated ground rules.
Sure.
Sure.
The budget this year, as compared to years in the past, is done in a caucus. All members are usually present, and all members have input to that discussion.
So this year, was that the case? Were
Same
all of the members
yes,
present?
same as it's been every year.
Okay, great. And when you met in caucus with the members of the majority party of this board, did you limit their input to 5 minutes at a time?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to restate my objection to this question. I'm sorry, but I just don't think it's appropriate to ask questions about matters that occurred during caucus. We wouldn't ask the Democrats that because it's inappropriate. And I don't think we should be, I don't think we should be answering questions. And I say that as a member of the party, not as a member of this board. Okay, both, I guess, I'm sorry, right? I guess I don't.
Tim, just to answer your question,
Right.
I will get to the why that I'm asking these
Okay.
questions, and at the end, I would like to make a statement. But in
That's
order to
fine.
make that statement, I need the answers from Mr. Chairman.
I agree with.
And I wasn't
with
able
Ms.
to ask these questions at the last meeting, as you all know.
I'm not sure what questions you weren't able to ask, but I agree with Mr. Donahue that what happened in caucus happened in caucus.
Okay, so,
And the information I've given you should be, I would assume, sufficient. If your intention was, did everyone have input? Yes. Was everyone present? Most times, because we've met several times, I can't remember exactly if there was anyone ever missing from those times, but pretty
that's
much
my
everybody
question.
was there.
Right, so I just want to make
So that's-
sure that
that's-
everyone had the chance to
Everyone always has a
participate.
chance to speak.
Right, if they're present, right. So, and were your ground rules that were included in our May meeting, were they included in an agenda or announced to all Board of Finance members, or you just read them at the very beginning of that?
I got to move a little bit because I'm getting a glare off that
Oh,
table.
I'm sorry. Do you want me to shut that door?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
The rules that I stated, or the outline that I stated at the beginning of that meeting was to give everyone a fair time to speak before conclusions were drawn. If we had done more, and in reality, if the first time you spoke, I think you went for 10 or 15 minutes, even though I said 5. But the reason we did that, simply that the lowest person on the totem pole, which actually would have been you, because we did it based on years of
Seniority.
service to the board, We wouldn't have heard from you. If we gave everyone an hour, we wouldn't have heard from you for 6 hours.
Well, I mean,
But
according to my
that's-
calculations, we owed the public 6 hours, so I wasn't in any
We
rush.
spent a lot more than 6 hours putting that budget together.
Oh, I'm absolutely certain of that. Right.
So-
So the point is that the Republicans were not constrained during your caucus.
And neither
in
was
providing
anyone
their
else at that meeting constrained.
You had every
You had-
opportunity. You spoke at the Board of Finance meeting in
Yes, I
February.
understand, but
You
according to his
advocated-
ground
You advocated
rules.
for a reduction of the Board of Education of $300,000.
That's right,
So
I did.
I think that you had every opportunity to speak at that meeting, at the February meeting.
I
So
think the correct analogy would be that if it was a Democratic caucus, you and Mike wouldn't be constrained in your discussions unless it was self-imposed.
Right, and our Democratic caucus would not have any influence on the budget, whereas the Republican caucus did. So-
Your Democratic caucus, assuming you had one, would have influence because you would have presented your argument as a group. In reality, you presented two different facets. So we were listening to one person with one set of items and another person with another set of items, instead of you combining it, caucusing yourselves and coming up. Now, as far as limiting you in time, you were
Yes.
never limited in time. There could have been,
You said at the very beginning of the meeting.
and I also
I
said that
limited you
it
to a
would be, it would continue around,
Right,
and then if a person have a second time, we can go around a second time, we go down a third time, as many times
Right.
as was needed.
So-
Then the motion was called,
yes.
and you voted yes, you didn't say no. When the discussion was ended, when motion to end discussion, you voted yes, you didn't vote no against that.
Mr. Chairman, my recollection was that because that was a remote meeting, which was unusual for us.
Yes, it was
that
very
one of the
unusual.
reasons you put that structure in place was that, so that people could talk without, having other people talk over them. It's easier when we're in a group like this to see who's talking, right? It's a little more difficult on the phone. So my recollection was that you gave everyone
yes,
two
it's-
rounds to make their comments in parts that people could not be, talked over by the other members.
If you listen to what I said precisely, there was no limit to the number of times that round robin could have gone on until the motion was called. And you also voted in favor of calling the motion.
So my point is that prior to that meeting, you were able to obtain all of the input without any restrictions from the Republican members of this board. And then once we got to that May 20th meeting, were the two Democrats allowed the opportunity to actually voice
Well, that's
their
state
opinions.
statute, you can't caucus with us, so I don't know what your point is.
Well, in previous years, there would have been a March meeting and an April meeting in which, as a board, we could have had a discussion, correct?
And we had a discussion
didn't.
at that meeting then.
Right. So
So what was the problem with that discussion?
it was taking the place of 3 meetings rather than,
If
right?
it takes the place of 3 meetings, it takes the place of 6 meetings. What was
Okay.
wrong with that discussion?
Okay, so in imposing this 5-minute restriction, it was very much
You're
targeted.
saying there was a restriction, there was a restriction on the amount of time you could speak per go-around. And as I said, you at least did 2, if not 3 times that limit.
Right.
Because you were making a point, I let you finish the point. But it would be unrealistic in any type of meeting, especially in that format, to have someone speak for an hour.
Have
when
you ever
there's 7
imposed
members
that
of the
time
board.
constraint before?
We've never had a meeting like that before.
No, I know, but certainly we've had a meeting in which you've had to listen to the Democrats offer their input, and you've never imposed a 5-minute constraint or any time constraint.
No, and there
Correct?
wasn't, but you keep saying there was a constraint. There was no constraint. You could have spoke as often as you wanted to.
Which you did. You had a couple of go-arounds at 5 minutes each. So as
Yes.
the chairman just said, it was a 5-minute per go-around.
Yes?
Did you or did you not vote at the end to conclude the discussion? You had the opportunities. You spoke at least 3 times.
I spoke, again, with this constraint that was not imposed previously on any of the Republicans. That's my point.
Everybody at that meeting had a
The
time.
same
Prior to
go-around.
that meeting, there were no constraints placed on any Republican input to this budget,
So
correct?
did you not express your views in the
I
go-arounds?
absolutely was not able to. In fact, I said that I had $220,000 in cuts from line items, and you, Mr. Frieda, told me that you had already been through the budget twice, and so you didn't need to hear them.
So we did not agree with your cuts.
No,
So
no,
what's-
I wasn't able to present them.
So you weren't able to present in you had 3 go-arounds at
Yes,
5 minutes each?
absolutely.
And you weren't able to present your points of view
So
in
how
those 3
does that amount
go-rounds?
of time compare with the amount of time that the Republicans in caucus
So why
were
did you
able
vote to
speak?
conclude the discussion at the end? The chairman just said he called for the vote, and you voted for it.
I thought you gave us a list as well during that meeting.
What I gave you was $300,000 cut from the Board of Ed, and I listed $280,000 in capital cuts, which you didn't agree with.
which you told us what
And
they
then
were.
I also said that I had $220,000 in line item cuts that I carefully, meticulously went through the budget, and I was not permitted to even articulate what those cuts were.
If you wanted,
So-
Let me say something.
Sure.
I think the chairman put a timeline of 5 minutes each solely because we weren't sitting in one room like we are now when we converse.
Right.
And he did it to expedite the meeting as a whole, because if we allowed one person like myself right now to ramble, the meeting we would have lasted 3 hours, 4 hours.
Right.
So, my understanding was that the 5 minutes was just to keep the meeting moving, moving forward.
I'll add, to
Sure.
facilitate conversation, if you speak for an hour, how is someone going to comment on the first 5 minutes of your conversation, or the first 5 minutes of requests or suggestions you had? When you have a list of, what, $500,000 worth of suggestions, by the time you got to the end of those suggestions, you think we're all going to remember every one that you had?
Well, I mean-
Did it not make more sense to do it in stages?
But
May I
I
comment on
wasn't
the
allowed
minutes?
to
Certainly,
present them
Miss-
at all. That was the point. It wasn't that I.
Yes, you were.
May I comment on the minutes, please?
Sure.
Okay.
So, and I think what you said was, your question to Rich was that the development of the budget didn't change. I think that's where we started, right? So, I mean, I've been on this board twice. In all years except when, for 2, I've been in the majority, and in one term, 2 years, I was in the minority, along with Rich, the 2 of us were. But, the Republicans have always caucused. We've
Yes.
caucused, when we were in the majority, Rich and I caucused when we were in the minority. So, I mean, it wasn't the 3 meetings that you mentioned, it was 1, but I mean, that part of it isn't any different than what we've always done.
I understand.
Unless you didn't caucus this time, because you normally would.
No, we definitely did. But the point is, the results of your caucus resulted in the second version of the budget, correct?
Yes.
Okay? So in other words, all of the contributions of the Republican members of this party, of this board, were made without any constraints, and they had a direct impact on the budget that Mr. Frieda presented, and ultimately, we were all presented with to talk about on May
And the
20th.
Democratic members had no constraints on the amount of things they wanted to bring up. You just couldn't do it in one breath. You had to do it in 5-10-minute increment breaths.
Right.
I don't understand.
And as
Ellen,
Mr. Lianos pointed
Can
out.
you do me a favor, do close that door?
Yeah.
I'm just getting blinded from that
Sure,
sun.
I don't want you to do that. But as Mr. Lianos pointed out, when I made my hurried presentation, he had difficulty actually following what I was saying because it was complex. There was a lot of material that I had to present, and I was rushed through it because of this.
Then
these
why
ground
did you
rules.
vote to call the question, and why did you vote yes when the question was called? You should have voted no.
So the point is that I'm still being constrained, and the Republicans were not constrained. So let me just skip to, all of this and just get to my statement, which was, given the fact that the budget presented by Mr. Frieda on May 14th and discussed on May 20th was a one-party budget, in my opinion, and the 5-minute restriction clearly both handicapped and constrained the minority voice, that these are the reasons that I voted against adopting the proposed budget, as well as the unwillingness to hear my suggested $220,000 of additional cuts, or even consider any cuts to the BOE budget, which again seemed like a unilateral position of the entire Republican side of the board. And I don't know why. I don't know why that there was that unwillingness to even consider cuts to the Board of Education, given the history of this board, but it was never discussed. So that's my statement, and I would like it entered into the minutes, and I would also like your ground rules also entered into the minutes, which they're not.
Well, I would suggest
I'd like
that
to
we
make a
already
motion.
approved the minutes, but I mean, if we'd like to reopen them, I don't have an objection.
Yeah, we just.
What ground rules are you?
The ground rules that Chairman Monaco stated at the beginning of the May meeting.
The main meeting.
The-
5
the-
minute.
the May meeting.
Honestly, I gotta weigh in here.
Sure.
I think Rich did the same thing, 5 minutes. People, I wasn't sitting there with a watch. And he called everybody's name, which was helpful because the public knew who was talking. So he would go through everybody's name, which was awesome because he didn't want to start speaking. What if I wasn't finished and somebody after me started talking? I thought it was very organized. He kept going around as far as the Board of Ed. First of all, we can't tell the Board of Ed what line items to cut, that we cannot
No,
do
of course
that.
not, no, right.
So the assumption I thought when you said Board of Ed cuts, that you had a list. We can't do that.
No, it was a total dollar amount, yeah.
But the problem was if you looked at what was going on currently, in my opinion, it would be hard to cut them when they could, at that time, it wasn't looking like they were gonna make their budget when the fiscal year ended. That's my personal opinion. But we have in the past, and I've been on this, 9 years, 10 years, whatever, we have told the Board of Ed, here's a dollar amount, you have to cut it. So you
Yes.
can't say that we've never done it.
No, I'm saying that's the history, is many years of telling the Board of Ed, we're going to cut X amount, and for whatever reason, last year, meaning a year ago, and this most recent
haven't.
round, we wouldn't touch it.
We
And I don't know
haven't, but
why.
in my opinion, is looking at the actuals and what was going on, we could have cut it and then they were gonna go over, so what would be the point of that?
Right.
Who knew about this pandemic and how long it was gonna be, and of course it changed things, nobody had a crystal ball. That was my opinion, why I made those statements at that meeting.
And
Okay.
let's not forget, all the times I spoke at these meetings and the Board of Selectmen meetings, talking about the rising cost of special ed. To
Yes.
take $300,000 out of that budget, and if we listened to you, and not knowing at that time we're going to go through this pandemic, at a time when it was verified special ed costs were rising, it would have been decimating to the school system to do that. That's why we didn't cut it, for special education. This government will always support special education in this town, and that's why we didn't cut it, because you wanted the $300,000, we weren't going to do it.
I also support special education, which is why you and I both were trying to do something with CCM, you more so than I, as the president. But I'm also trying to address that very issue, and not necessarily with our budget, but legislatively.
So that's the reason we didn't cut it, special education. All right, well, I think we got to move on here.
Okay.
We are
gotta
going to move
move
on.
on.
But
Yes, absolutely.
before we do move on, I will add one thing.
Yes.
Maybe you're not aware of, Nancy. I would say at least a lion's share, if not a strong lion's share, of the Board of Ed budgets that have been presented to this board have been approved without any changes over the years. Very rarely do we cut it. And that goes back to when Mr. Frieda first came on as first selectman. There's a few years when they were having some problems, when they were changing with their business managers, and there were things that were just wrong, and they jumped out at us, and we modified them accordingly.
Sure.
But the lion's share of budgets that have been presented to this board from the Board of Ed has been approved. This is probably one of the first times that anyone's looking for such a drastic cut, when we all knew that they were having problems. Having said that, the minutes have been approved and passed. Next order of business. Expenditures from June 30th. Everyone's had a chance. Any questions on expenditures?
Want to approve the expenditures from May?
I don't have reports from May with me. Well, the June will do this. Can you do May and June at the same time?
Yes.
Wonder about
Do
that.
May and June at the
You
same
can handle
time?
it any way you want.
Well, just do it as June. We don't technically have to approve reports from every month. If we approve June, we're basically approving for the year. So, it's cumulative. So, are there any questions on expenditures for the June reports?
Now, I asked my questions, which was farmed out to everybody in an email, so.
Okay. We're starting with expenditures, not
Expenditures?
revenue?
Yeah.
Okay. All righty. So
That is the first.
I have a couple of questions, if anyone else wants to go first. Okay. Let's see, page 4 of the expenditures. Building inspection permit consultants were 64% over, or $25,000. Ed, do you know anything about that?
It's just the need for the, one of the building inspectors, I believe.
I would just assume that in a pandemic that all of that would have been kind of curtailed, at least for the last quarter of the year.
Yeah, but some things weren't.
Okay.
So I can find out exactly and email everybody tomorrow.
Okay,
If it was buildings, construction was exempt, and construction never shut down.
Page 6, personnel policy expenses, reserved accrued benefits is 175,000 overspent. I'm assuming that there were some retirements.
Yes.
Is that the case?
And the problem is, we never know when we're budgeting how much to put there, because you could have hardly anybody retire, or you could have a bunch of people retire. So we try to use the 3-year average, that's how we come with the 200. This year, there were some long-term employees that had left, so that's why it went way over budget.
Got it. Okay. On that same page, page 6, central supply telephone down at the bottom was 38,000 overspent. That's a lot of telephone time. What exactly does that mean?
No, that is telephone, but I think we were working on a new system with fire and police, and we had to put some money out toward that, so I think that's included in there as well.
So telephone for fire and police, but it's under central supply?
Well, because it benefits all the departments.
I see. Okay.
Otherwise, it would be charged directly to police or directly to fire.
I see. Okay. And I think Diane asked something about this in her email, but I just have to ask again. On page 7, central facilities, supplies of...
Yeah, that was in my email.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to understand, how do you define supplies at $196,000? And, which is over by $196,000, and you said 107 of that is pandemic expenses?
Right, correct. It's all the
Supplies.
stuff we've had to buy that's related to the pandemic, but fortunately, we're gonna be reimbursed from FEMA for 75% of it. But I have to charge it somewhere. That includes masks and everything else that has been bought by all the departments.
Okay, so it's not just masks.
Oh, no, everything that was bought related to that.
Gotcha, okay. And the cultural center is the historic building, right? It's not Martha Culver, or which is it?
No, it's the building over here.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so, because Martha Culver would be a separate line, but the cultural center,
Yeah,
that's
and that
also
needed some work,
there.
and when they did the floor, they found asbestos, so that just blew the thing away.
But what is the cultural center expense of, that's over by 30,000? That's not.
Yeah, right.
The asbestos-
Renovation of the historical building?
Yeah.
Gotcha, okay. So that's not the floor of the Martha Culver, it's of the historical?
No, this-
Gotcha,
right.
gotcha, okay. And then, again, I'm always confused by recycling, waste, and hauling on page 11 and 12. Let's see. So at the bottom of 11, disposal of recycled material, that was over by like 29,000. And then on the next page, disposal of hazardous and regular waste, that was over by almost 5. And then the hauling, so the hauling, we haven't started yet, right? Or was there some storm that I'm not remembering, where there was a lot of hauling?
The storm that we just had, when was that? Forgot the date of that.
Was the question on municipal...
Well, this is hauling of waste, isn't
waste,
it?
That's
right.
hauling waste.
Municipal
Hauling
waste,
waste.
so,
Right.
Transportation hauling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so that's not like
no.
storm
No.
anything,
No.
it's hauling of waste.
Right.
I see, okay. So each of those things seems to be, are we underestimating, or what?
Yeah, let me comment.
Tipping fee.
Well, it would include
So-
storm damage, right?
Yeah,
It's,
well-
it's both, right?
What's happening, ladies and gentlemen, is, and I'm speaking now as chairman of the Covanta Policy Board, so tip fees are rising. Mira, the Hartford facility, is closing. The demand for repositories for municipal waste has increased dramatically. So during the pandemic, COVID hit the Wallingford transfer station where we deposit our trash. We went from a $71 tipping fee to a $92 tipping fee because we were under contract at the $71, but when the plant was riddled with COVID, on Easter weekend, I was scrambling to find a place we could send our trash to. So Easter weekend, we finally found that the New Haven transfer station was a place that we could go. We fast-tracked the permit to get there, but we ended up paying $21 or $22 more a ton to deposit waste. So these are the sign of the times. Every municipality in the state is going through this. In eastern Connecticut, they're looking at rates at $145 a ton for depositing municipal waste. Now, we are currently at around $92 a ton. However, back in the month of up until June 22nd, I was able to negotiate a $68 a ton rate, which was $3 a ton less for at least a month because the Wallingford transfer station opened back up again. So what we see here is an over-expenditure based on the market tipping fees rising dramatically, and they will continue to rise. But I want the public to know two things. This is one of our record years in terms of the lowest numbers of budget transfers over $20,000 in terms of number of lines. And number two, that despite the fact that we're overexpended on some of these lines, the town came in at $2.1 million less in expenditures. $2.1 million. So I want to make that point.
Mike, what is the total tonnage that North Haven generates?
14,400 tons a year.
14,400.
And that's going to, and that'll probably be higher now, because what we've seen all over the state is that when people were staying home and not going out as much, then all of a sudden the municipal waste and the municipal recycling increased dramatically.
Yeah, waste stream increased. People
So-
aren't going out. People aren't working.
People are eating at home, right? But the tipping fees didn't go over budget, which is the next section in sanitation. The tipping fees stayed at 97.8%. So it's whatever these additional costs are in addition to the tipping fees.
Yes.
That's what you're talking about. Okay.
Okay?
And then last is, I think, again, Diane asked on page 16 about the rec center, the additional year-to-date $30,000 for recreation center maintenance. And Ed had explained that about $13,000 was for the pool lights. So what was the other 17.7 just for the rec center?
There's just a lot of repairs that needed to be done over there.
Uh-huh.
I don't have detail, but it's.
Okay, I just wondered if there were any
No, nothing big. That was
big
the biggest
things.
part of it, yeah.
That's what I wanted to know.
There was any, was there any pool maintenance? Usually they have pool maintenance.
That's not till August, though.
Is it? Okay. I knew they had it sometime in the summer.
Yeah, they
Okay.
usually shut the pool down.
Yeah,
August, drain it,
Yeah, I
repair
couldn't
tile,
remember.
repair decking.
And it was closed for a while, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay, that's all I have for expenses.
Michael, you got something?
Well, first I want to compliment the first selectman on that explanation on the tipping fees. If there's any other extraordinary, unusual situations that have occurred over the last 3-4 months while we have not been meeting, by all means, interject at any time and bring it to our attention. I had no idea that if there was COVID in Wallingford, that they couldn't find other employees or personnel somewhere in some department to keep that operation alive and going at the old rate. But I'm glad that you did find a replacement for our trash, because we don't want it piled in the streets like brush. So again, thank you very much for that explanation.
So let me say one other thing, Mr. Chairman, on this. So Ed and I were tracking the incremental amount during the pandemic when the Wallingford transfer station was closed, and we're submitting that as pandemic COVID expenses, the difference between $71 a ton and the $92 a ton. And one of the things the rating agencies loved that we did, and it was one of about 17 reasons why we once again were AAA rated, I'm addressing the public now, is because unlike most municipalities who in this current fiscal year projected the revenue from COVID-related expenses from FEMA, one municipality put in $6 million of projected revenue, not knowing if they're going to get it. We didn't do that. So what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that we incurred the expenditures, the pandemic expenditures, in the fiscal year ending June 30th, and we still came in $2.1 million in under expenditures. And we're going to reap the revenue of it that's non-budgeted revenue when we get it probably next May or June, or whenever we get it. So we didn't budget for the projected revenue. Can you imagine the other municipality I'm referring to? In order to try to balance the budget, they put $6 million worth of revenue in that they don't know if they're going to get. We didn't do that. And the rating agencies picked that up, ladies and gentlemen, right away. The fact that we did not do that.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, so once again, if there's any other unusual circumstances that have occurred with regard.
There is.
With regard to the pandemic or the recent tropical storm or any other situation, by all means, Mr. Swinkowski or Mr.
Absolutely.
Frieda, please inform us as time goes on.
Will do.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
What else were you going to say?
No, there is one other thing, but it's a little bit further in, it ties to something else, and we'll bring it up then.
I have a couple of questions on it.
On expenditures? Go ahead.
I just had some comments on page 8 and 10 where the fire and the police labor lines are, and that is that both the chiefs managed to bring in their budgets, their expenses under budget. Apparently, if we throw enough money at the fire department, they finally will end up with a number that we like at the end of the year. The police that seem to operate almost as though they're a man down. Although if they were a man down and it had to get filled by other contractual means, it still would have showed up as a line item somewhere there. But to have their just even regular full-time personnel under budget by $139,000, I'm not sure how we got there, but I'm glad that we did. So I really would like Tom to oversee all the budgets of all other departments in town. Meanwhile, the fire department again showed surpluses, showed leftover funds in full-time, overtime, and contractual replacement, which is another form of overtime. So that in the end caused them to be under budget in total by about $50,000, which isn't much, but still it's the right side of the ledger to be on. I thought that those comments were necessary, since I've said comments to the contrary in the past about certain departments.
Anything on revenue?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yep.
Got something?
I have a couple of comments for revenue. So on page 1, the bottom of the page, the MRSA bonded distribution. So as everyone on this board knows, MRSA is the only source of revenue that is recorded as both a regular revenue line item that supports the budget expenditures and keeps the mill rate down, as well as a separate special revenue fund. And this year, we expected about 1.4 million in MRSA funds, and we actually received almost 1.9. So I just feel as though the 128% collection should be reflected both in the revenue statement as well as in the special revenue fund statement that we have in the single page. So as it is now, it's simply reflected as percent collected 0, and the only number that's listed is 1,445,730. And if you look across the 682,000, that's really what we've spent. Isn't that correct, Ed?
That's through 11 months, because the 12th month, I just put it right to the fund.
Okay. So, again, just in the interest of transparency, I think it's important to say, like every other line item in the budget, this is what we budgeted. In the case of revenue, this is what we received. And then in that last column, have it reflected as a percent relative to what we budgeted. And to show it as 0 and then to only have the budgeted amount, I just don't think that that's entirely transparent. So I know that there's a special way of recording the MRSA funds as we spend them, but I think at the end of the year, in the year-end amounts, we really should have this reflected like every other line item.
Seeing Mr. Swinkowski actually gives us a separate report in detail on it, I don't understand why you would say it's not transparent. He lists everything that came in, everything that went out, in a special fund as the auditors requested.
Because it's not just a special fund. It's also a regular revenue line item, which is why it's included in this report. And so therefore, it should be reported like every other regular revenue line item.
The only thing is, you're trying to ask for me to show it as revenue here and revenue in a separate fund. You can't show the same amount in both funds. It's got to be one or the other. So if I'm showing it in the MRSA fund, Fund 365, for $1,000,008, whatever it was, I can't show it in the general fund. You can't show it twice. It's one or the other.
And he's following the guidelines he was given.
Tim and I have
Disagree.
spoken on this issue in the past, and
Yes, I'm
we're
sure.
a little bit in agreement with what Ms. Barrett's saying here. But Tim, what did you want to mention first?
This is the expense report for June, so the MRSA money that we did spend last year, which was $735,000, right?
Correct.
We
But as
reduced
I
the,
just-
we reduced the expenses, right? Because the income's not here. We had to
We
reduce
reduced
the
the expenses
expenses.
and reduced the revenue, correct.
So we worked both
So,
sides of the
right,
equation.
right. So it washed.
Which, if you want to handle it in accounting fashion, you know, of course I've disagreed with how it's handled, but that's
6 years running.
That's right. That's right.
And they keep saying, "Well, this is the last year, it's the last year,"
New-
so.
New year, same problem. The only problem that comes up here is not, sure, we've got the paperwork and we know what's happened. Transparency is more about how the public, how this information is disseminated to the public. So when Mr. Frieda just mentioned that we underspent by 2.1 million, we did. We underspent by 1.4 million. Still good, still very good. But that 2.1 million is reflective of this, is not reflective of the 735,000 that was spent on operating expenses.
Well, but Mike, if you said that,
But
you'd
neither
have to
is the
say
revenue.
yeah, you'd
Neither
have
is
to,
the
you'd have
revenue.
to say we got
That's
735.
good. You could
Right.
say, right, you could say we got another 735,000 in revenue. And the reason why you can double credit it, so to speak, you're not double crediting it. All it would be is a transfer from the special fund to the general fund, and then you can show how it was spent, the expenditures. So it's not, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be a transfer and then an expenditure. But anyway, again, this is year
What's
6
the order?
that I'm
Year
complaining
6,
about. Huh?
What are our auditors?
They're very comfortable with the way we're doing it.
To be clear, the auditors have no say in our budget practice,
But-
internal budgeting practice. The external practice, yes, and we asked this question of him, and he said that he does not comment on our internal
Thank you.
accounting
So
practices.
the rating
Getting
agencies
the
support
internal
us
and
in
the
this.
external confused here.
The rating agencies don't have a problem with this, they understand it clearly. So, you know, now correct me if I'm wrong, years ago, wasn't this what was presented to the Board of Finance to do it the way Ed's doing it and the way I'm
No.
doing it?
No, it was imposed on us. We were never
So-
asked to how this would proceed.
So I guess I'm still mystified by, he gives a separate report. It's documented in the reports.
I know.
that all the-
Right, as long as whatever statement you make to the public includes the added reconciliation of what was spent, but just taken out of the budget by use of the special funds.
So take me through how you want to see it then. I want to hear this again. How do you want to see it?
I've said all you had to do was add another step to our whole monthly accounting, and that is acknowledge what comes in to a special fund, and then make the transfer from the special fund into our general fund for revenue, as revenue, which, you know, you were doing in terms of notification as a revenue item. You were increasing it every time that we did spend some of the funds in the MRSA. But then it's the end of year entry to negate all of those expenditures that occurred during the year. That's the problem I have.
Because the revenue and the expenditures have to be together in the fund.
That's why we do it that way.
Yeah.
Just what Ed just said.
Right.
So-
Well, you feel as though that's what the state regulation is on these these
We can
funds
make an
are-
argument it's more transparent doing it this way, because there's a detailed explanation of the expenditures from the revenue.
It is not transparent when you say that we underexpended by $2.1 million.
Ed, do you want to comment on that? We went, you and I manage this every day. Go ahead.
If we had put them,
Is that accurate? Is it really accurate?
But Mike, you know as
the
well as
way
I...
we do it, yes, because we're consistent from year to year, we do it the same way. And yes, and then if you look at the other side of it, the revenue would be over by
Right.
900,000, whatever it's gonna be.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
that is not gonna make any difference.
The public voted on a budget. That budget included all these expenditure items. The fact that those items just disappeared because of the use of the other
But the
special
revenue
funds.
disappeared at the same time. It's both sides of
That's
the
right,
equation.
and I
are
think
handled equally.
Right, I think that should be in there. I think it should go both ways. That we did get added revenue and we did have added expenditures.
So
Absolutely.
nothing else changes.
No, the bottom line does stay the same.
So I'm happy the way you're doing it. I have no objection to it.
Look,
It's in more detail now than I think we've ever had.
We manage this every day. This is what we do every day here, okay? But I'll tell you what I'm willing to do. If you want to send Ed a detailed explanation as to how you'd like to see it, because I'd like to see it on paper exactly what you're talking about.
I did, okay. I have at a previous meeting.
Okay.
Can I make...
But
Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, but again, the reason why I've dropped the objection every year is because we always think it's the last year and the program's going to end.
Well,
That's the reason why we never made the corrections.
Well, you can blame me for that, because I sat in the governor's office, and him and Melissa McGraw, the secretary of OPM, I talked on behalf of all the municipalities how important the MRSA is.
Ed,
Well,
this is the
No one's
MRSA,
disagreeing.
this is the special funds sheet.
Right.
Yep.
MRSA's the highlighted one I got here.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's been other months where, at the bottom on the left, you've detailed the expenditures.
This is
So,
my question.
you know, maybe that's the way to get Mike the transparency
Well, those are
you
for
want.
expenditures that are in addition to the budget.
Can I just finish up, please?
Sorry.
So, we expended $735,000, right?
Correct.
That's a combination of operational and capital expenditures?
No. Let me just clarify. When we sent this out, the 600,000 and change was only
This
through
one.
May.
Tim, this one,
Right. And then
not that one.
that's what was reversed out through May on the report. June was actually charged directly to Fund 365, so that's not on there. If you add June plus May, cumulative, you come out to the 700,000.
Right, but what I'm saying is, if we had
That's
this,
all the detail.
right, but this 735
Yes.
is a combination of both capital expenditures and
No.
it's
No, that's strictly operating.
Okay, so...
There were no
so-
capital expenditures.
Okay, so would it make sense to make it clear for Mike and the rest of the board that on the bottom left here,
Yeah.
to detail what we spent the 735 on?
You have it.
It's in another report.
Okay, which report's that in?
This report here, it says by month, straight time.
Oh, sorry.
Straight time snow, overtime.
This one?
Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
the headings.
Oh, there it is, right there, yeah, sorry.
So
we're done.
Yes, so to Tim's point, I mean, I suppose you have two reports, right?
Right.
You just outlined, Ed, what we do, how we do it.
Yeah.
I guess what we can do is put it all on one page, Tim, to your point. if that's-
Well, I'm just trying to solve Mike's problem. I mean,
Okay.
it was there, I apologize, I didn't see it.
Yeah, well, yeah. My problem just had to do with end-of-year reporting.
Okay,
That's
all right, okay.
Okay, so.
All right, well, look, you
Numbers
But
are
thank you. I just had to state that I am in agreement with the objection, because she's the new person on the board, so she's seeing this for the first time. When Tim came here, he was scratching his head, and look
Never,
what happened.
never.
So.
All right.
Anything else on revenue?
Just two more quick things. Page 2, town miscellaneous receipts. I'm happy to see that it was 84% over, but just curious as to why. It was budgeted at 250 and we received 460. Any big things that
Yeah, well,
we should-
one of the big things that came in was I had to transfer money from the daycare for health insurance because it's paid for the workers over there, and it hasn't been out of the fund. It should be paid back to the general fund to reimburse them for their cost of health insurance.
I see, okay. Insurance. Okay. And then lastly, also on page 2, the increase in town clerk fees collected, an extra $232,000, is great to see. I assume that we had some property sales at, a 1% that we bring in. And then that actually offset the decrease in building fees, the shortfall of $241,000. So I assume we had some big sales, property sales in town, and that was the reason for it?
No.
It's a lot of little things.
It's a lot, the
town clerk fees?
Stacy did a great job in managing this for us in the month of June.
Uh-huh.
And we were in contact with Stacy every day. She was giving us projections. And then what we see every year, ladies and gentlemen, in June, it's a big month for these collection fees in the town clerk's office. So it was a lot of miscellaneous things. There were no property sales. So
okay.
it just was a nice job in staying proactive by the town clerk, Stacy Yarborough, in terms of making the collections.
Mm-hmm.
Our fire fees were over and our building fees were under, but I think when we combine the two lines, I think we're in pretty good shape. We're just about where we needed to be.
Anything else on revenue?
Yes.
You want Mike?
There's many days of the week that I forget to take my memory medicine, so this is one of them. The special revenue fund transfer, the third line down, in the last month, another $130,000 there. What was that?
Police outside duty.
Police outside duty.
Yeah. It's all, the 330 is all police outside duty.
Okay, all right, so that's discretionary. Okay, in terms of when you wanted to
Yeah.
do that. I mean, you could have kept it in that, the other special account if you
Mike
want.
and I are looking at, talking to the rating agencies, and they want us to increase the fund balance, so we are trying to do whatever we can to up it just a little bit.
Okay, all right, that's good management. That this board has no say. The personal property audit, I know we don't want to aggravate too many businesses in town, but we did not do any personal property audits in this.
We did, Mike, I just didn't get it from Gary to break out between arrears, interest, and, well, actually arrears taxes to move it to there. It's actually been going down because we've been doing them on a regular basis, but we still do them just to keep the businesses honest.
Okay, so any income from there is in another.
It's just in another account,
a different
right?
line.
Usually I reclass it at the end.
Okay. All right, and any auditing that takes place is strictly up to the assessor, or who makes the decisions about how to conduct either random or targeted audits?
Gary works, excuse me, Gary works with the consultant to determine who to pick.
Okay. Consultant, all right. And over on page 2 here, this might have been covered in one of Diane's pesky emails, but the town miscellaneous receipts, which last month, I guess we got the credit debit $305,000, but we're over. That is, we did receive over $200,000 more in that line item than what was budgeted. Is there any sort of not a breakdown, but what were the major items there that boosted that line?
Well, the biggest one, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, was that we reimbursed from the daycare fund for the health insurance that's been paid over the last 2 or 3 years. They had to reimburse, the general funds paid the health insurance. They had to reimburse us out of the money they received. So that money was moved into miscellaneous receipts.
Okay. Love the miscellaneous. All right, thank you very much.
Special funds?
Yeah, I have a quick question, or actually an issue that I think I'd like to present to the board for everyone's consideration and advice. I know that Diane and I have mentioned on several different times the issue of the paramedic billing that appears on the special funds each month, and it seems like, month after month, this winds up being a deeper and deeper hole. And just for people that are watching at home, just to give you a little bit of background, back on January 11th of 2016, Fire Chief Paul Chanyshevsky gave a presentation to the Board of Selectmen proposing changes to the North Haven Fire Department, and he proposed a new administrative position, the deputy chief, at a proposed initial salary of $89,000 with a list of duties, and that one of those duties is paramedic billing. And the position was approved based upon the chief's assurance that the position would bring in approximately $400,000 in revenue each year. And I'll just read from the minutes of that Board of Selectmen meeting that with regard to the proposed fire department budget, the board agreed to advise the Board of Finance that they did agree with some of the underlying goals of the chief's proposal, but felt they can only endorse the related expenses if the costs can be offset by the revenue generated by the proposed model. So if we just look at this last year, the cost of paramedic billing was almost $178,000 and brought in a little over $32,000 for a net loss of $145,500. Did I say those numbers correctly? I think so. And again, in the very first month of this year, we're already $10,000 in the hole. So I think it's time to reconsider and certainly revisit the wisdom of the paramedic billing program. Again, there's been lots of changes in terms of various things that are going on within the fire department. But again, from a purely financial standpoint, I think that this is something that this board has to reconsider. So I'm interested in hearing what everyone has to say about this.
Well, I know I've asked about it just about every meeting. And
Absolutely.
I did notice that, and I guess the question is, does that have anything to do with the response time now from AMR, because
No.
they're responding, so then how do we solve this? Because, I mean, it did come up a lot.
And I think at one point, one of the answers we got was there was a delay in the billing. And I think at one point,
Collections.
some months ago, I asked for receivable, which I think the agent, which was circulated to the members. But I don't remember the exact number, but it wasn't a huge number, if I recall. Any feel for, do they have a lot of billings out that we just haven't collected? Are you aware of that?
Yeah, but the issue comes up, then how much do you push to pursue them?
Well, these aren't against insurance companies?
No,
I think the intention of the town is to collect insurance money where they can. If it's a resident without insurance, the town does not push the issue.
That's right.
But he didn't come up with $400,000 thinking that we were going to chase individuals in the town for that.
I'm not sure what they were thinking, but I know the town doesn't pursue residents for using a service that the town provides. If their insurance company, if they have insurance for it, yes. But if they don't have insurance, I don't think the town pursues it.
Do we have some sort of breakdown, at least, as to
We could ask the fire chief for something.
expense here means? Because it's $177,000 for the year.
You're talking about the salary of the,
Well, that's part of it, I'm sure.
Well, that's
but
most of it, yeah. Salary, it's benefits, Medicare, et cetera.
just for the one person?
Yeah.
I see, okay. So it's not that there's any
No, it's just
legal
that-
expenses associated with trying to collect these bills. And again, to Diane's point, if we have paramedics that are accompanying given residents all the way into the hospital, on the one hand, that's a fantastic service that we are providing. On the other hand, it also means that that same paramedic is then taken out of circulation until he or she is returned back to North Haven and is able to respond to another call. So that might contribute to delays or perhaps even inability to respond to advanced life-saving calls.
Could we get a breakdown of what exactly
Are
they
you
can bill for?
Are you suggesting the town, if the resident doesn't have insurance, the town should pursue that resident for the cost?
I would love to be able to see some sort of breakdown as to, is this something that is purely
But
collectibles?
Is that your intention, is to pursue the resident for the cost if they don't have insurance?
I'm not proposing anything. I'd love to be able to see whether this is, 3 cases versus 100 cases. And if that's the case, then, let's not worry about the 3 cases, that if those are people without
And if it's
insurance.
100 cases?
Maybe
If
the
it's 100
question here is
cases,
to
well,
ask
then
the
let's
chief.
What they're
Maybe we
billing
should
for.
Send them a thing and just ask them for a breakdown
Yeah,
of medical
I
as
think
to
we
where
need
That's
they
a
are.
it. I
breakdown
think we
because
need the
Give us
no
a-
one's
give us
saying
a
bill
current
them,
bill.
but I think then if we're not collecting, then this number needs to change.
So-
Right. I kind of feel like we're in the dark.
Right.
in
That-
So let me,
terms of the
let me
nature.
try to
Nature.
shed some clarity on this.
Sure,
I'm going to
please
speak
do.
in general terms, okay? So when we look at Medicare, if a resident doesn't have a supplementary Medicare policy, that's the addendum that pays for an ambulance service, as an example, okay? So if they just have Medicare and no insurance, and bills go out to residents, we've made a decision, we're not gonna put a hardship on a resident that doesn't have the Medicare supplement coverage. Now, what we do is, for those that don't live in town, we will pursue that. And believe it or not, we get letters from people who say, oh, can you waive this? It's a hardship, we don't have the Medicare supplementary coverage. So it's the Medicare supplement coverage that handles the ambulance cost, okay? So we've probably lost some revenue there. Now, the chief will be the first to tell you that we have an option to turn on and gain more fees, but it's gonna hurt us locally in terms of paramedics in town. So the more we bill for, becomes potentially an issue where our response times here, if God forbid 3 or 4 calls come in at the same time for paramedic service, we could be compromised. The chief can talk more in detail on that. But let me say the position itself, Deputy Chief Scott Martis, although the numbers aren't coming in for some of the reasons I just mentioned, this man has done a remarkable job in training and bridging the gap so that the volunteers really are working very closely now with the paid department. So his value has at least met the difference in discrepancy in revenue versus expenses. We're at an all-time high here in terms of how paid and volunteers are working, and the level of training has been augmented significantly. And I'm moving forward with a fire department training facility, largely funded by Quinnipiac University. So we're on the right track, I think. It's just the revenue versus the expenses that jumps
Yeah,
out.
and I think if we have the details, then we just need to look
Okay.
at this for the budget.
I think that's
all
a
I'm
fair
saying.
point.
Yeah.
It's a fair point. We'll get the details.
That's
okay?
all we need.
Yeah.
That's it.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Board of Education?
Board of Ed, oh, that's interesting.
Well, then you can start this, Mike.
Can't help you there.
Well, first of all, we did get something was in our packet from August 10th, right? Does that? Yeah.
Yes.
And that,
And then we're
and
gonna
of
do-
course, it's not, the first column is what, a 1/12 original appropriation? Did you see the August 10th report?
What are you talking about, Mike? Yeah.
Yeah, Mike, I'm not following you. What's wrong with the August 10th report?
That's the New Year.
Oh, that's, yeah.
Okay.
No, I thought the numbers were off, but they're not. So let me go here.
Take those bills again.
Let me go.
June, not July.
Let me go.
Anyone else have questions on Board of Ed?
Just one,
Well, Mike,
and maybe Ed would know, or maybe Mike, but the last item, is this COVID-related 6 SWATs? It says BOE CIF unbudgeted, we spent $282. Is that, do you think, the COVID costs that were incurred by the school? It's the last one.
No. That's, when Mike and I met with Patrick and Howard, we told them, they have the option to move money into the Board of Ed Capital Improvement Fund.
Oh, I
So
see.
that's what the 282 and changes. 282,875. So they moved that into the Capital Improvement Fund.
Okay. Michael, did you find your question?
Yeah. A couple things here. This is our first meeting, I believe, under the school leadership of a new business manager. I believe at least the third one in 3 years, is that right?
Fifth.
The fifth one in 3 years? I've lost count.
Oh, we all have, believe
Yeah,
it.
it's been about 40
Yeah.
years.
Right, exactly.
Before.
Your question?
Don't ask me to name them.
Well, did anyone want to introduce the new business manager to us? the individual, who's in charge over there now? Ed?
That's how it says at the bottom of the page, Howard
Yeah.
Wadlow.
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to mention that Pamela Mangini, the last business manager, I thought she was very appreciated by us, and she was very clear in
Yes.
the school's
Thank you very much.
presentation to us. So,
We agree, and I think you'll find, and Ed and I see it because we meet with the superintendent and the business manager on a regular basis, you're going to really like Howard. He knows what he's doing, he gets it, and he's working very well with Ed here.
Excellent.
Yes.
I
Did you have a question, or we're
hope
good?
his salary and benefits are good enough to not be attracted to another school system. My major question here had to do with, on this budget, had to do with busing expenses. The busing expenses for regular, special ed, and athletic, the encumbrances remain on the school budget here for pretty much a full expenditure, more or less, on each, when you average them together, of those two categories. So my question is, with the end of busing that occurred in March, what did our contracts say? What were we obligated to pay, and what is still being possibly challenged?
Well, I can just speak generally. It's not something that Ed and I manage because it's done by the Board of Ed attorneys, but they worked out an agreement with the bus company, and they paid X percent of what the contract would have represented. And I think that's what you see in the line regarding the regular transportation. There's a decrease. So we don't know the details of what that was. There's an increase in the special ed side, and we think, although we would have to get it confirmed by the superintendent, since the start of the last fiscal year, there may have been more entries, more special ed students coming in that they hadn't projected the Board of Ed, and that might have led to the increase in the special ed transportation costs. That's what we think, but we can get that verified.
Okay, so these figures will not be, you don't think, adjusted further in any way? These do represent end-of-year settlements, wouldn't you, more or less, with the bus company?
Well, they're end-of-year legal liabilities that they're gonna have to pay one way or the other. Sometimes they don't come out to the full amount, and whatever's left will be turned back to the general fund. But as it stands now, these encumbrances are pretty much almost like accounts payable. They're gonna owe that kind of money at the end, as of June 30th.
Okay, so for the $1.8 million we usually, we would be spending on regular bus transportation, the savings that occurred were for the $209,000
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, a lot has to do with the governor's order
to pay
those items.
those items. If the bus company applied for and received any PPP funding, would we get credited for the PP funding that they received for their personnel?
I don't think so.
I don't think so, Mike.
No, I don't think
I
so.
don't think it works that way.
No.
The PPP doesn't work like that, and
They'd have to they have to put an application for forgiveness in, Mike, and I don't really know that exact process. What the penalty to them would be that if they got PPP money and they didn't have qualified expenses, they'd have to pay the loan back.
yeah, with 1% interest.
Right.
It wouldn't be forgiven.
Right.
If they didn't have the expense, that PPP money wouldn't be forgiven. They would pay 1% interest on it. The governor had an executive order, I don't remember the exact wording, but basically guaranteed that payment. And since most of it comes from them,
I think they said if it
received-
was budgeted in the budget,
Right.
you had to pay it. Isn't
Yeah.
that what they said?
But I know there was some sort of discount that they negotiated.
Oh, yeah. If the governor did not make that executive order, the town would have probably been in even a better position.
Probably right, yes. Yep. So,
I understand that the people still had to be paid during this situation, including bus monitors, which is something I think that might be a different line item. I'm not sure if that's included.
Don't know where they have it, but the same thing I said.
But that is accurate, Michael, you're right, that's accurate.
Yeah. On the first page of it, the nurse salaries, was that something that was just forgotten during the last budget session? that they forgot to put that in as a line item. It's the original appropriation 0 and but it might have just been a moved line item. Is that possible, Ed?
Probably.
Maybe it came out of pupil personnel because there's almost an identical drop
Yeah.
there.
He just might have reclassified it to show separately.
Okay.
I think that was part of the things that they had to correct for the state, was categorizing certain things, and that's probably why that shifted like that.
All right. In the Board of Ed's May monthly report, in the narrative section, it did state that a contract for the food management company was completed and approved by the state, is being presented to the board for approval at this meeting. And this is written to us. It's not for our approval.
No.
It was for
No,
it's
we
either
don't
Board
have
of
anything to do with
Selectmen
it.
or
So let me
Board
explain.
of Ed?
No, so the Board of Ed would vote on that, and Chartwell is the proprietor. Chartwell won the bid again, so they're going to be continuing.
Okay, and that gets approved by Board of Ed.
Yeah, no, that's.
Well, I didn't know if the town contract got approved by the Board of Selectmen, if it pertained to the Board of Ed.
Not on
It's
the,
just like a purchase order. It's just a purchase order for service.
on the food service side with Chartwell, that does not get approved by myself, Ed, or the Board of Finance.
Okay. That's all except for the general question about the leftover funds at the end of the year, which will, I guess, all right, we'll
We
get
can
to
do that
it.
in
We'll get to it.
agenda
Okay.
item 5.
Right. Thank you very much.
I just had a quick question about the Board of Ed, for Ed. And again, this applies to both the Board of Ed and the town side. Were there any new categories that had to be created for either budget that were pandemic-specific in terms of expenditures?
Well, on our side, we just added them to the supply account.
Right. But
Uh,
anything related to the Board of Ed? Because again, I imagine cleaning and custodial is standard, but were there any unusual things that had
I couldn't
to?
speak to his.
Okay, I just wondered if
I
there
don't
was
see anything
something.
listed in their report.
No, I think you
so-
just got them in the other.
Yeah,
You just
the original-
added them in?
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
exactly what happened. They were added into existing line items, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Anything else? Can I have a motion to accept the June 30th, 2020 reports as presented?
Make a motion.
Second?
I'll move it.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? July 31st, 2020, our first reports, which really don't show a lot, because again, it's the first month. Questions on expenditures?
The only question would be, we expect 75% reimbursement from FEMA for storm-related expenses.
75, yep.
Okay.
Report on, any questions on revenue?
Just one question on the estimates. How do they derive? Is that from projections or history? Where do we come up with these estimated numbers?
The state provides us with estimates, the rest is experience, what things have been. The projects Mr. Frieda has, and those are in the pipeline. You're talking about those revenue items.
Yeah.
But the state actually publishes numbers for us during the budget
So
cycle.
Jim, are you asking about the state projected estimates?
No,
or
I just, in general.
So we have an anticipated tax collection rate, okay? And that's kind of the bulk of our tax revenue coming in, that tax revenue rate. So, so that is the estimate, projected tax collection rate. So, and generally, we're at 100 or 100.5% of our projected tax collection rate revenue. And then the other revenues, of course, we will estimate. We'll take building permit fees, okay, town clerk fees, so.
That's your thought.
Right, so we'll, you know, we dropped that. You know, I had a lot of input in that because I know what's happening in the future on some of these permit fees. So we'll do a 5-year look back as an example. We may do a 10-year look back like we did on the anticipated tax collection rates. So those are estimates based on look backs, what history has shown.
Shows history and okay, good.
Special funds?
I just had a quick question about revenue, actually. Actually, it's not even a question, it's just a comment. If you look at the tax revenue for the month of July, As you can see, we're at about 37%, and I think typically, July tends to be the biggest collection month, and it's usually around 50%. So it appears as though at least some people have taken advantage over the extended grace period.
That's right.
But it's also very nice to see that we have collected almost 35 million. So we have plenty of cash going forward. And I think it's everyone's concern.
We have plenty of cash. Ed and I made two significant debt service payments in July. We've made payrolls, including one payroll that had an HSA reimbursement to the employees, and we're delighted with the cash that's come in.
It's great.
Special funds?
I have a special fund question that's related to
If you say
the
MRSA,
actual June. The police line expense for June 20 of 242,000. That was inclusive of the 130,000 that was taken out.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. Yes. The deputy chief expense line, I see that the fire fee relates to a consultant line in the fire department. The deputy chief's expense line, is that just part of personnel in the fire department?
That's his salary and benefits.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now he doesn't have a separate line in the fire department. It's all part of personnel. Okay. Good.
Right.
Paramedic.
Board of Ed? Hearing none, can I have a motion to accept June 31st, 2020?
I'll move it.
Second? I'm sorry, I said July 31st, 2020.
I'll move it again.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 3, resolution for budget transfers. Before we read the resolution,
Hold on, I have a question regarding a couple of them, actually. Can we ask some questions before we vote on this?
1 second. Mr. Sminkowski had sent us a preliminary final report. You also gave us the transfers. Was that being updated, the transfers, or the dollar amounts, or where it was from?
This list?
Oh, you mean over 20 and then over
Yeah.
20?
Yeah, yeah.
We're good with that, right?
That's it.
That is
Oh,
it?
okay.
All right.
Okay.
Yep.
So I have some questions about that actual sheet.
Well, this one sheet details the ones over 20
Sure.
within the department, the ones outside each department.
Yep.
And the resolutions include 3 different items that total to the last page of the schedule of expenditures compared to budget.
Sure.
Okay, so let's,
So that way they're all accounted for.
there really are 2 categories, within department over 20, among various departments over 20. Questions on the within department over 20?
Yes. Okay, so the fire consultant, as we all know, that was, that position was inadvertently not included in the budget. So the question is, how can we transfer within the fire department to a line item that is not actually included in the budget? So the 91,542.9, we've been paying that throughout the year. I don't know where the money is coming from, but we have not actually included that fire consultant in this budget. It was written as a line item, but if you look at all of the monthly budget reports, it's recorded as budgeted as 0. And so the question, Ed, is how, from a transfer standpoint, can we do a transfer within the department from one line item to another line item where the second line item is not in the budget?
Well, I could have just put that I could have consolidated that with other consultants. So one way or the other would be in some consulting line. So I felt like either way, I should be able to transfer money to cover that.
So the question is, how do we do it within the fire department budget? Because that's the category that it's in.
Right.
And then related to that, how can we actually transfer there's two things for fire here, fire consultant and fire personnel holidays, which are still within the department, the fire department. And as Mr. Hallahan pointed out, the fire department was under budget, meaning underspent, by only about $50,000. So how do we take $50,000 that is underspent and we cover 91.5 in a consultant and then another 28.9 in holiday?
Because if you go to the page on scheduled expenditures compared to budget, and if you look at the fire department,
Yep.
they have $244,000 worth of line items that are under budget. So you take that and you can allocate it to other line items that are over budget.
This is July.
Ed, is that, oh, this is this larger,
Yeah.
Right.
what page is that on it? No page number,
Yeah, there's no
sorry.
page number. Under fire,
Okay.
Yeah.
right halfway through. But their total, excuse me, their total underages in that department are $244,105. So from that money, you take it and allocate it to other line items there within their department.
So I'm looking at this total fire, and it's saying available budget is 49,356.54, right? On page 11? This is of the June,
The expenditure report?
yeah, end of year expense report, right?
Right.
So we
Well, if
have
you net the
50
two in the from, you get the 49.
So we have 49 to play with, and how do you cover 92 and 29?
I think what he's saying
That's
is
far in
that,
excess.
No, I'm saying on this, I should put page numbers on, but where you have the 244,105, I've got that much money to move to other line items within their department. At the bottom of the fire page in this
Uh-huh.
larger report. This one.
Oh, and that one?
Yeah.
I see. Okay, sorry, I was looking at the wrong report. Okay. So I was just looking at the.
Yeah, if you
net
go to the
amount.
bottom page, you see the 244. That's what's available from underages.
I see. Okay. And then the same thing with the transfer station. Again, that was over, it was 108.6%, so how does that cover the transfers? And you're saying transfer station,
Okay.
We have
Well,
money to
first,
cover that.
within departments, you have to look at the line, the column labeled from.
Uh-huh.
There's 68,859 that they could work with.
right?
So it was used for those first two items, the 66 and the 2,374. That actually equals it exactly. So that covers, could be used to offset other lines in that department,
Okay,
all right? And then everything above and beyond that has to come from other departments.
right. And I think there's one thing that's not here, which is transfer station disposal of hazardous and regular waste, which is normally on page 12 of our thing, that was it was overspent by $4,500, and it's not listed here. So
No,
there
these are over
there's-
20,000
I see, so over 20,000
Right. within the department.
total.
Correct.
I see, gotcha. So
Yes.
not individual line items that are
Right.
over, okay. And then.
And then the next category is over 20 among various departments.
Right, exactly. Okay, so transfer station and fire, okay.
You followed it?
Oh, and
Any-
the last thing was the debt. It was the transfer of 54. Where exactly is that listed? Sorry, it's the next category, among various departments, over $20,000. The debt, principal, and interest.
That would be on the last page,
Second to last page.
second to last page.
Because
Yeah, second to last page.
again, in the actual end-of-year report, it's listed as a different number. It's listed as.
Well, I think there's two categories. In the report, it's
218,000,
Interest in principal.
right? Oh, so this is just
So
debt?
this is together, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Anyone else have a question on overtures, or over 20,000 in department, 20,000 various departments? If not, I will read the resolutions. Hearing none. Resolved that the Board of Finance approve adjustments in the appropriation of certain line items in the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget, transferring amounts over 20,000 to accounts as follows. Budget transfers totaling $538,149.62. Can I have a motion to move that resolution?
Make that motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolved that the Board of Finance approves adjustments and appropriations within the same department in the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget, transferring amounts over $20,000 to accounts as follows. Budget transfers totaling $554,783.17. Can I have a motion to move that resolution?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolved that the Board of Finance recommends the following adjustments and appropriations of certain line items among the various departments in the 2019-2020 budget, transferring amounts over $20,000 as follows. Budget transfers totaling $253,380.38. Can I have that, a motion to move that resolution?
Make a motion.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? My last resolution, that the Board of Selectmen be requested to call a special town meeting or include same on the agenda of the annual town meeting for appropriation of certain line items among the various departments in 2019-2020 budget, transferring amounts over $20,000. Can I have a motion to move that resolution?
Make that motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Our next item on our agenda is milling and paving. Mr. Frieda, would you like to say anything to it?
First of all, let me say that these budget transfers will go to a town meeting. We're anticipating the town meeting on September 22nd, and it's about this time of year, maybe a little bit beyond because of the pandemic, that we're going to be asking for an appropriation, a bonding appropriation of $2 million to pave at least 10 miles worth of roads. So that's what this is, and that'll be addressed at the town meeting. Our town engineer, our director of public works, and myself, we're looking at the roads that we think we need to do. So it's part of our continuous paving program, where we try to pave 10 miles of roadways per year. And yet, with 194 miles worth of roadways in town, it's an ambitious goal to try to get every mile of road paved. But we've made a lot of progress down through the years, and we'll continue to do so. So that's what that is on the town meeting. And then, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like me to address debt, I will, because that ties into this too, okay?
Yes, could you?
So,
I was going to bring that at the end, but we can do it now.
So I want everyone to know that we're doing very well right now. The rating agencies made a statement that we can best endure the turbulent financial times that's going across the United States. We're better equipped than, quote, the nation. So we're doing very well. Ed and I have spent a lot of time in managing this government every day from a financial standpoint. And I'm happy to say that we refinance bonds. We'll be saving $2.2 million, approximately $2,273,000. And what that means is that in the next 3 fiscal years, we will be able to reduce the debt service line through that refinancing by approximately $725,000 a year, ladies and gentlemen, watching on TV, starting in next fiscal year and for 2 years subsequent to that. So it's a significant savings. So when we look at our debt ratio to expenditures, we're still about 8%. This will reduce the debt. Now keep in mind that, as we've said here many times, we are now paying on the middle school, we're paying on the on the police department station. So this refinancing comes at a critical time where we're going to be able to reduce the debt load by, on an average, about $725,000 a year for the next 3 fiscal years. And all along I've said I'm trying to build a bridge to the future, ladies and gentlemen. And by that, this comes at a great time to help offset some spike in rising debt because of the capital improvements, the middle school and the police department, but also get to a point where the debt service drops significantly in about 7 years here. And that's a good thing for the town of North Haven. The one cautionary tale is the state is anticipating a $2.5 billion deficit in FY21. And all of us, mayors and first selectmen, me as president of CCM, we're watching what the impact of that could be in next year's state reimbursements. So that's the cautionary tale that we're really looking at. Right now, we're doing great. But this government will never get complacent. Never. We're on a relentless approach for continuous self-improvement. And we're doing good now. We're going to get better. But we got to watch some of the outside dynamics that could adversely affect us.
Thank you. Michael takes a three-pronged approach to government. He deals with refinancing our debt, getting it down where we're losing those spikes that we were anticipating, growing the grand list even in these times, and then expenditures, keeping a tight rein on them. And that's one of the reasons the tax decrease this past year. When you take action like this, which is really administrative action, and it smooths out our spikes.
Well, we got a great team day to day here, myself and Ed.
Mrs. Smikowski's the best.
We work well with bond counsel. We got a great financial agent that we work with, and they like us, we like them, and right now the rating agencies love us, ladies and gentlemen, so I think that's a good thing.
Was there any other questions on the
Well,
milling?
no, I just want to
Sure.
comment a little bit, follow up, and state that the debt service is something that we don't, on this board, have direct control of, because a lot of the issuance of bonds and projects and so forth pertains mostly to the Board of Selectmen. But we certainly support whatever projects are necessary in this town, which is why spending next year is going up over 5% on the town side. But it is logical that this happens in a growing town that is taking care of its infrastructure. So to a certain extent, it is completely understandable. I didn't know, though, that you can get savings in 3 years. I thought that the reconfigured debt would have a more gradual long-term impact than $725,000 a year.
Well, that's normally the way it would work, but we worked this out.
I'm
this
assuming
way,
that's
so.
cash flow savings, right? That's not.
Yeah. It also depends on which bond issuances are coming
Right.
up and which ones they can pay off. In our case, it worked out in the first couple of years, we got all the savings right up front. There's
That-
still savings in the years after that, but.
But that was the key, the selection of the bond issues that we're able to do that enabled us to capture tremendous savings in the next 3 fiscal years. And then it trickles down. As Ed said, we'll still have some savings, but it's really good news for the residents and for us as a town.
You have to realize the way Michael and Ed look at this. Now, they just knocked those 3 years down, $700,000+. Then we're going to have 3 years that might be a little status quo, and then we're going to have a drastic drop again. So when you start looking out 7 years,
Yeah, now that's net
it's-
savings, that's inclusive of the cost of refinancing those loans. That is, which is why we get so many solicitations to do that kind of thing
Oh, we get
from companies.
we get a record amount of people that are interested in our bonds. So,
Ed, did we earn a premium on that?
no.
No. What kind of rate to get, do you remember?
Won something?
Really?
Tim does this for a living. He knows what other municipalities do. And so it's really good news. But again, we're never going to get complacent here, and we've got to just keep this relentless, implacable approach. And that's our game plan here every day.
Right, and an example of this, the uncertainty of state revenue, also comes from the fact that they didn't fund the elderly disabled homeowner loan.
That's right.
Now that sounds awful.
Right.
So if I have an injury and I become old, the state's never going to help me out at all.
You're on your
All
own.
right, why don't we condition that?
what do you mean when? Moving on. Anyone have any questions on milling and paving? Resolved that the Board of Finance recommends that the town of North Haven appropriate $2 million for milling and paving of town roadways. The project shall consist of milling and removal of waste materials, paving and materials, installation of manholes and drainage risers, traffic protection, including signage and police and flag personnel. The appropriation may be spent for design, demolition, and construction costs, equipment furnishings, materials, site improvements, survey costs, architectural fees, engineers' fees, and other consultant fees, legal fees, net temporary interest, and other financial costs, and all expenses related to the project. And the town issues bonds or notes and temporary notes in the amount not to exceed $2 million to to finance the appropriation. Can I have a motion to move that resolution?
Make a motion.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Our last item on our agenda. Actually, you all have it in your packet. It's a resolution. The governor, Michael, if you'd like to elaborate on it, or,
If you could read it first.
all right. I'll read the resolution. Resolve pursuant to Connecticut General Statute, Section 10-248A, and the Board of Education's resolution at its July 23rd, 2020 meeting, the Board of Finance shall adopt an amount, shall deposit an amount not to exceed $557,718.20 from the Board of Ed account into the account Board of Ed unexpected prior year funds for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2020. Can I have a motion to move that resolution?
I'll move it.
Second.
Second.
Discussion. Mr. Frieda.
So years ago, ladies and gentlemen, when I first took office, I spoke with the superintendent at that time, and there had been a run on spending the money that was budgeted in boards of education all over the state. So we worked out an agreement here where I presented that if you come in with a surplus, we will give you back the surplus in the following fiscal year to be used for capital expenses. So a good example of that is Common Core. When that came into play, the Board of Education needed to upgrade all their computers. We had a surplus of $355,000 at that time, and we gave that back to the Board of Education, and they spent it on capital that would have been in the budget next year that would have been a taxpayer's expense. So we eliminated an expense of $355,000. So every year when there was a surplus, Ed and I would work with the superintendent, Bob Cronin and now Patrick Stirk, to give them the money back that they delivered in a surplus for expenditures in the following year's budget that would have been in the taxpayers' expenses. So since then, the state of Connecticut has memorialized it into a state statute that it must be done. So what Mr. Monaco was just reading is the governor's narrative on this, but it's something we've been doing all along. And the one thing I'd like to just reiterate for those watching, sometimes we try to take complicated information and put it into just basic common talks to try to deliver an effective message. What it means is that any surplus that the Board of Ed derives is given back to the Board of Education to pay for expenses that would have been in the following year's budget that no longer are needed to be in that budget. So it's a taxpayer's advantage to do it this way, and that's how we do it.
So in other words, the state has finally caught up to something the town of North Haven started with Michael 10 years ago.
We were one of the first to come up with this concept.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, well, our workaround, because the prior rule was that everything had to be spent.
That's right.
And
Or
that
was returned to the general
yeah,
fund.
Right, yeah. I guess we got to allow them to create a future capital account that had undefined encumbrances. But they actually were defined in that they did give us capital items that were more or less deferred, such as in the past has been technology.
Exactly, right.
That's how we funded a lot of that.
Right.
And maybe some security items too. So, yeah, we found a workaround, and now we don't have to do that anymore. But my question, obviously, would be the same question anyone on the board would have. What do they want to do with this $537,000?
So Ed and Howard...
557, I'm sorry.
So Patrick, the superintendent, and I met with Ed and Howard. We set the framework up based on this memorialization of the statute, and Ed and Howard are working out the details. Ed, you'd like to share it?
Right, well, it's going to work like the capital improvement fund. It's under our jurisdiction and our control. So nobody is going to spend any money out of the account without Department of Finance say so. So they could make requests, and if they look legit and fine, we will process them.
Who approves?
Me.
Is it just expenditures, or can they do capital? Is it restricted?
No, no restriction.
Buck
They can do
stops
capital.
there.
No, it's capital, but Ed would approve it. You know, what we can do is provide an update at the next meeting as to, some of the
Right.
entries.
As to where they
okay?
stand.
If I could just ask some questions about this, because we all have
Sure.
copies of the actual statute from Connecticut Statute 10248A. And again, the language in the statute is not anywhere near as clear as you're specifying within our town. And in fact, the language says that the budget-making authority, that's us, we can make appropriations for the school district, for town, and we may deposit into a non-lapsing account any unexpected funds from the prior fiscal year from the budgeted appropriation for education for the town, provided, one, such deposited amount does not exceed 2% of the total budgeted appropriation for education for such prior fiscal year. Two, each expenditure from such account shall be made only for educational purposes. And three, each such expenditure shall be authorized by the local board of education for such town. So the way that I read that, I'm not a lawyer, is may, not shall. So may means discretionary, and shall, I know that Jeff D'Onofrio has harped on this point, shall means we must do it. So it sounds like each year, we, the Board of Finance, have the discretion as to whether we are going to send any surplus from the Board of Ed budget into this non-lapsing account. And from the language here, it seems to me that the only authority that we have is whether it's placed in this account, and then once it's placed in that account, it sounds like the Board of Education, according to the Connecticut state statute, they have the discretion as to how it is used. And again, in this year, it happens to be $500,000, but 2% of 57 million, we're talking about $1.1 million. It could be, and that could accrue over time. And we wouldn't have any say, not that we say how the Board of Ed spends their money anyway, but again, this to me seems like there's some wiggle room, and I'm just wondering a couple of questions. What have our town attorneys said about the interpretation of this particular statute? If we refuse, I assume it goes into the general fund. And then, Mr. Frieda, what is CCM's position on this particular statute? And how are Board of Finances in surrounding towns dealing with this?
Well, I don't know of any municipality that's not going to do this, because it defeats the purpose of what we did here 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So why would we not want to do it? That's what most municipalities are asking, because we want to create an incentive for the Board of Eds to deliver a surplus, so that the surplus can be used for future expenses. By not doing this, whether it's shall or may or whatever, is irrelevant to me. I have to be perfectly honest with you, because this is a continuation of what we've been doing that's been effective, because it saved the taxpayers dollars, rather than have what has gone on for decades before in some municipalities where there was a rush to spend the money because it was budgeted. We don't have that here anymore. So the notion of discretion, whether we do it or not, to me, we're going to do it, because it's the best thing to do for the taxpayers. So your question is the discretion may, shall, right? That seems
it's
right.
a decision that this board can face every single year.
So I know of no municipalities that are not going to comply with this right now. Now, there will be more on this probably as time goes on, because we're only in the first month of the fiscal year.
Sure, yeah.
But since we adopted what we did 10 years ago, there were at least 10 or 12 that followed us that liked the concept, because it saved the citizens money in future budgets.
So every year for the last 10 years,
Yes.
that there has been a surplus.
Absolutely.
We've
Well,
applied
every year for the
No, that
past 10
hasn't.
years, we've had the concept in place. There were some years where there was no surplus.
No, of course.
But, yes.
Only in those years where there was a surplus.
Absolutely, right.
Okay.
So it's a good thing, ladies and gentlemen. It's good for you watching on TV, because it saves you money in the long run. And at least $500,000 in surpluses over the course of the past 5 years that I can recall, that would have been expenses in future budgets.
But this statute doesn't say what you're saying, Mike.
I read it as
understand
may
that's
too,
what you're gonna try to
Nancy.
do
That's the
here.
way I read it.
Yeah, so.
I read it as may.
But the
It's
notion.
Not just may, that it's saying that it only has to be spent for educational purposes. It doesn't say it has to be spent on something that would have been a budgeted line item for the next year.
Yeah, that's the distinction. That's
Right.
a little
Sure.
bit different than what we've been doing.
Yep.
So, but the governor, in my mind, put it out there to set the framework, and I think everyone's going to comply, because they're going to see it the same way we did. It's a savings for the taxpayers in future years.
Yes.
So,
Nancy, I don't want to preempt your questioning, but I mean, what I was going to ask Ed or Mike or even Mike Callahan is that, I think the four of us, and maybe others on the board, know that, the self-insurance fund lacks any reserves, as far as I know, with the Board of Ed. And, there may be a small amount budget next year, I don't remember, maybe there was none. But, my question would be, is there any discussion with the superintendent about putting some of this money aside to fulfill that? Because
yes.
there's a fairly good-sized hole there, if I recall.
That's a great question, Tim, and
Yeah.
the answer is yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And for special ed as well,
Right.
because
Yes.
it's completely unpredictable.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I thought a lot like capital, the reserves that we have on the town side would actually be lent or used or could flex over to the Board of Ed side if necessary. But I don't know, whether accountants would allow that kind of thing to occur.
Same pair of pants, different pockets, but they need to carry their own weight as well.
But if in total and in the aggregate it's underfunded, then this would be an excellent
Oh, yes, definitely,
part of all of those funds.
Yes.
definitely. Any other discussion?
Yes, sir.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. And that finishes our agenda for tonight. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Board members have any
In
comments?
lieu of public comment, since we're all members of the public. Just, no, really brief, and the first selectman will like part of this. The registrar of voters, of course, is going to have some really important things to
Yeah. manage
over the next few months. Can we give them a signal that they can go a little bit outside their budget if necessary, just so that our town responsibilities are maintained?
Well, I think we've already done that, Michael, because what we did was we supplied all the PPE that they needed for the primary. We've put partitions in their offices, so the answer to your question is yes.
Well, I mean about the time that they'll be spending, counting absentee ballots and so forth.
Well, we do offer a stipend for the election day services, but, look, I would say that our budget's our budget. Do we have some flexibility? Yes. In future, in the workshop sessions in January and February, perhaps we can address it then, what the incremental needs may be.
Right. I mean, for instance, our initial paid time that we were allocating for part-time workers to come to the polls, on a per-hour basis, is it enough to attract people in the current climate?
Well, with COVID, probably not, because many of the poll workers are in that age demographic where they would be considered to be higher risk. Let's say it's 60 and over, as an example. So the answer is probably no. But look, I'm open to any suggestions on how we improve the process. And I will say, Patty Jackson Marshall, Lori Jean Hannon, they're working great together. They're doing a great job. They work very hard. Stacy's been involved, really helping them as a resource. So we got through the primary, and now we have to see what happens in the general election.
Okay. All right. Very good. We have capital items are on the 5-year plan. I just want to know if Mr. Swinkowski has any plans to apply for any exceptions for use of those MRSA funds for any of those items.
We
Yes,
did.
we
We
did.
already have.
We already have.
Yeah.
I think we had applied
We
for
talked about it.
various items.
Yeah, we talked about it at the budget time.
Yeah. We're still waiting for an answer. We haven't heard back from them yet.
Primarily Michael in Public Works with some trucks, but yes, we've already done that, yes.
Okay.
So,
All
and
right.
just to further explain this, in my conversations with both the governor and the secretary of OPM, they will, because that door was closed. I may have mentioned this at a past meeting. Through CCM, myself,
Right.
going there, we opened the door. And they agreed we'll take it on a waiver by waiver basis to look at what we can do. No guarantees, Mr. Frieda, they said, but we will look at it. So the door was open, and we took advantage of that.
Okay. Yeah. The repaving is very important for our citizens. Some always ask, will there ever be a sidewalk construction program similar to that?
That's a good question. And the way it's worked probably since 1959 here and in many cities and towns, is that sidewalks were put in by developers when the town was being built out, but the sidewalks became the property of the residents. So any upgrades, maintenance, the residents would have to do. There's a liability to having a sidewalk in front of your house. God forbid if it's cracked, someone trips, it's the homeowner that's liable. Sidewalks, I believe, are critically important.
I'm just saying other towns do it.
Yes.
How do they approach it?
You talking about an improvement, Mike, or a new sidewalk?
They put in,
They put
I
in
think
sidewalks.
Camden does.
So we...
In blocks where it's missing, where it's within school districts.
We have been looking at this. We have Lynn Sadowski exploring grants, because some municipalities have gotten sidewalk grants, like we got 6 years ago on Skiff Street, from Van Rose to Whitney Avenue, about $148,000 roughly in sidewalk grant, and we received that. But I want to just point out, because some residents don't want sidewalks,
I can understand that.
and we have a street in town where the neighbors were pitted against each other, which I was directly involved with years ago, because some people wanted the sidewalks, because in that neighborhood, the children walked to school, and other people opposed the sidewalks, and there was a tremendous conflict in that neighborhood. So there are unintended consequences to just saying as a municipality, we're going to put sidewalks everywhere. Because if it snows, the residents have 24 hours, they'd have to shovel them. So it's sometimes a contradiction among the residents.
Mike, is Lynn looking at connecting some sidewalks that might make sense? Because, sometimes they end,
Yeah.
there's a block or two of it, but there aren't any, and then they start up again,
Yes. So if there's grants out there, look, I can go on for hours on this, ladies and gentlemen, but I'll say this. So we have a street in town that's nearby. So citizens reach out for me and said, Mike, Mr. Frieda, we walk our young children in strollers. Would you consider applying for a grant for a sidewalk? Of course, but here's what I need you to do, I have said. I need you to help me spearhead this. I need you to ask the neighbors to be all on board, because before we do anything, we need 100% commitment. Because if there's one neighbor that doesn't want the sidewalk and everybody else does, then you have a gap. So that's a current process, a planning process right now. So I'm interested to see what happens with what the citizens say.
Okay, lastly, Mr. Chairman, we did receive in our packet the current collection rate history from the past year and years past. And once again, 100.1% of what was budgeted was collected. And so congratulations to our tax collector and all those who help with that, and to those who project that. So that's 100.1% of what we budget. We budget, I believe, did our amount go up
We
to
raised it slightly.
98.5?
Went up like a quarter or something.
Yeah,
We went up a
We
quarter.
went up a quarter, 98.75? I can't remember.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Well, whatever it is, that's
90
good,
and a half.
that's good forecasting. And by the last word on MRSA.
Can I
with the-
just follow up with that before you go on, Mike?
Yeah.
Do we update that every month, Ed? Do you update that schedule every month, or just do that once a year?
Every month.
Well, given Nancy's observation earlier, it might not hurt to maybe either give it to us for the next 6 months, or at least report on it at the meeting.
Tax schedule or the MRSA?
No, the collection rate.
No.
Collection rate?
Yeah, we could do that. We could certainly do that.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't hurt to keep a closer eye on it this year.
So it's September, we should see the big,
Right.
next month we should see it.
Well, they got, no, October 1, right?
October
October 1.
1. So September, by the end of September, everybody should be,
No, they're due October 1.
they have
Yeah.
to, yeah.
So you'll know, October report, you'll know.
The October report, you're right,
Yeah.
will show it, so.
Sorry,
Good.
Mike, go ahead.
Anything
Yeah.
else?
No, my last MRSA comment, I'll save for September. Got to say,
Good.
put something in the bank. But I just want to say the setup here, I think was very safe. Mr. Frieda was at a very safe distance from us. And
But I want you to know.
Ellen in the back, dynamite work, very nice over there.
We cannot forget Valerie Goodkin, right, Ellen? So if you're watching, Valerie, we have to give Valerie all the credit for this setup right here. She did it, she designed it, she laid it out, she consulted with Ellen, so I think it's worked out pretty well, wouldn't you say? Thank you very much, Valerie.
And in future meetings, I think if the public wants to submit questions to us in advance about anything, we should consider taking public comment in advance via email?
We would, yes, I think
That's okay.
If they want to, if they would like to send an email with a comment, not question and answer time.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, comment.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, comment.
Can I have a
I
motion to
apologize.
adjourn?
Make the motion.
Second.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. We're adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.